Alright, welcome. This is my presentation for Every Heart a Doorway, and my name is Sat Aurora. So let's get a brief preface to this video. So Every Heart a Doorway is a 130-page novella by Shauna McGuire. It's won several awards, and let's get a brief summary. So there's this character named Nancy who's just returned from her fantasy world, and when she comes back, she finds that she can't be accepted by her parents, by society, because of the characteristics she's developed, and that no one will listen to her story. So her parents send her to a school that's especially made to help children like Nancy who are struggling in some sort of way. But what the public doesn't know is that this school is just for people exactly like Nancy, who've been sent to these worlds and have the issue of not being able to adapt to society, and then they can't find their doorway back. So this school will either satisfy one of those two things: to either have them adapt to society, or they somehow find their doorway back, and then that's their exit from the school. So, can I recommend this book to high school students and teachers? Absolutely. I think that this book is really, really good, especially for three main reasons. So the first reason is that high school students can empathize with the experiences that Nancy goes through, and they can to be able to relate those is a really, really big thing. And I have a feeling that as we go through, you might understand, because you might be asking questions as to how can someone relate to a character who went to a fantasy world. But we're going to see that in just a moment. And then our second point is that the length is perfect to maintain a really good story without any unnecessary fillers. And then the final point that I'll be talking about is that the subtle details that appear in this book can test a reader's attentiveness. And so I have a really good feeling that teachers who go through this book will be able to test their students in a very, very efficient way. So let's go through each of these points. So our first point is that the inability for Nancy's surroundings, the society, the family, to understand her experiences is similar to what high school students go through during the years of their main growth. So, for example, when Nancy finds that her parents swapped her clothes that were all black and white for more pink and colorful ones, she reads out the letter that her parents wrote to her. And it says, "You're not going to boarding school to get better, not to keep wallowing in what your kidnappers did to you. We want our real daughter back." So her parents immediately suggest that there's something wrong with her, and that they clearly see something in her that doesn't match what their alignments are for their daughter and for their perfect child. So this is really important because it's similar to the idea that students that are going to high school are adopting or adapting to trends that are not necessarily aligned with what that students' parents are expecting from them, and so they feel obligated. These parents feel obligated to fix their child's issues. That as a student, you don't want to. You refuse to that because you have a feeling that your experiences are important to you, and they make who you are. So then the parents in this quote mention that that the people that took her are kidnappers, and that they want the real daughter back. So they say they're going to take action, but they're doing it in such a way that it makes a student feel like they're doing something wrong. It made Nancy feel like she's doing something wrong when she feels that everything she's done has been justified by the fact that her world was a really fun place to be at. And so that's the same thing that goes for high school students, where they're adopting a trend and they're doing stuff because it makes them happy. It makes that part of high school the climax of the high school experience. And so the parents are not taking into account why high school students are making actions into how they're shaping their own character. So by relating to these experiences, high school students can empathize with Nancy and be able to understand what actions that she took that are healthy and unhealthy for a relationship between themselves and their parents, themselves and society, and themselves and other things to be healthy, to be nice. And so understanding what went wrong and right with Nancy and the other characters who are troubled in this book is a really, really big thing that makes a high school student, grow further into their adulthood. So let's look at our second point now. So second, the story's length allows for the plot to always be progressing without any fillers. So, for example, Eleanor warned everyone to go to sleep at one point when the killer was on the loose. And then after that, the narrator immediately jumps to a description of a body. So let's see how this goes. So it goes, "Go to bed, my darlings," said Eleanor. "This will all look better in the morning." And then 3 stars. The body lay in the front yard, covered in a thin sheen of dew, face turned up toward the uncaring sky. So, ending on this hopeful remark that Eleanor had is immediately contrasted with this description of the body that will be killed, something that's mysterious, something that's violent. So, by using those stars in the text, the narrator is eliminating any unnecessary detail in between, which would be like, oh, the children went up and then they went to bed with their pairs and then they fell asleep. And then Eleanor came up and went to sleep. None of those unnecessary details are there because they don't provide anything for the actual plot of the story. Whereas directly skipping to talking about how the body was laying in the front yard and then it was eventually going to get killed is very, very important to the story. And so that jump right in between is something that this narrator, the author, was always doing in the story. And I feel like it's really important because it makes everything in the book relevant because the author wasn't afraid to cut some parts that weren't important. So by cutting, what could have been a 200 or 250 page novel became a 130 page novel. And so what that does is it keeps the students' minds attentive because they're always looking at something that's important to the story, something that's going to contribute to the greater plot. So in that sense, the reader is not going to feel bored. And so the student will be able to show everything they know because they're never having that feeling of, okay, this isn't necessarily relevant, I don't need to pay attention to it as much, or I'm bored, I don't feel like paying attention to this part of the story, or any sort of that matter. So they're able to have that experience where they're fully engaged in the story. And so having that short story not only allows for the students to have fun because they're not reading any filler parts, but allows for the teacher to grade the student easier because they have less things to do, and so they can spend more time on the analysis rather than reading a really, really long novel with half the novel being a lot of fillers. So that time that's saved can also be used as a reason to read this book because of the fact that English class can't be so long. As much as a teacher wants to teach 10 or 15 books, they can't necessarily teach all those books or go through all those books because there's just not enough time. So this story not only is short enough for the teachers to cram into a week or 2 weeks max, but on top of that, they can go through a lot of analysis because the students are able to remember everything that's important to the story because, in a sense, everything's important to the story. So it helps the teachers and students in that aspect. And so I have a feeling that any class that reads this is going to have a lot of fun doing so. And then now let's look at our final point. So third, there are subtle details that can easily test a reader's attentiveness. So whether they've been annotating or keeping up the book. And understanding those small details can give a much, much greater understanding of why the author chose different parts to be how they are. So, for example, Nancy describes the entry to her doorway as, "When I went through, I was in a grove of pomegranate trees. I thought I'd fallen and hit my head. I kept going because, and so on." But later in the story, the narrator describes the final part of Nancy's dinner as, "Picking up a glass of cranberry juice, she turned to consider the tables." So the subtle detail that can be caught here is that the cranberry and the pomegranate are very similar because they're both red fruits that have similar tastes. So this diction suggests that Nancy yearns for that entry to that doorway, for those the feeling of the pomegranate trees, the smell, the taste. So a subtle detail like that is so important to the story because it allows us to understand how a certain character is characterized, what qualities are of them. And so this story doesn't necessarily give qualities in terms of raw descriptions of them, but rather through what they say. And those subtle, small hints can train readers to build connections to different of a certain part of a story, to different parts of the story, to other stories, and to the world. The 3 most important connections. And so part of the Grade 12 English curriculum is to master these instincts, to have those instincts to build those connections. So there's so many small details in this book that are can be easily caught upon to the point that anyone who reads it and reads it attentively can make connections subconsciously. So by drawing those connections together, a student can train themselves to be more prepared for more complex books in the grade 12 English curriculum, such as The Great Gatsby or the play Hamlet, or even literature that will be covered in post-secondary education, because it's much more complex, and drawing connections is hard because the literature, the stuff itself, the content is not necessarily as straightforward. So having that foundation with building strong connections in a book that's not so complex to understand is a really, really good idea in my opinion, because it can set them up for success in grade 12 and post-secondary. And so that brings us to our conclusion, where there are three main reasons why I really recommend this book. That students can relate to the book and have a good interest in it, that the analysis can become easier, and that training is quicker because of how small it is and how it has no fillers. And then three, how it has subtle details that can be caught upon and then and are intentionally placed for a reader of a student level to be able to easily catch upon it, and so they can build connections. So overall, what I would say for someone who's considering reading this book or reading it for a class is I feel like it's a really, really good book if you read it at the beginning of grade 12. And the reason is because people are returning from their summer break or from other courses into English. And so they're not necessarily as familiar. Their minds aren't necessarily as trained as they were before in the year before of how to recognize those small details to make connections, how to annotate and catch things that can result in them understanding the story a lot better. And so I feel like this is a perfect book to start off the year so that they can be more prepared for post-secondary literature, but more importantly, the remainder of grade 12 literature, that is, with books such as Hamlet or Gatsby. And yeah, that's all for today. I really recommend you go comment down below if you have any questions. And yeah, I'll see you guys later.